Okay, let's get to our panel. Joining us now from Davos is Li Shen. She is managing editor of the famous financial news publication Caixin Global from China. Also joining us from Dallas is Merrill Matthews. He is a resident scholar with the Institute for Policy Innovation, a public policy think tank. With us too from Beijing is Qinduo Xu. He's a political analyst for China Radio International. And here with me in the studio is Sourabh Gupta. He is a senior fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. Welcome all of you to the show. Let's start back in Davos. Li Shen, you were there. You witnessed the US president's speech. There was a sort of a big sigh of relief over here in Washington that he didn't insult anyone or create any headlines. Was it well received where you were? What was the highlights?
I think people's expectation wasn't extremely high, so he actually beat expectation on that regard, despite the fact that most of the message has been repeated by him in the last couple of months. But overall, he was sending the right message to the right crowd. This is the business elite. So he's sending the message that America will remain open market for the business. It will be business friendly. The tax cut is aimed to boost business in America, and if America, as the largest economy in the world, if these companies continue to expand, it's good for the world. So for all these messages, especially his slightly surprising mentioning of TPP and his open stance on that, all those messages are pretty positively received here. And as you mentioned at the opening, that he was booed only once, and that was also a surprise.
Booed only once, Merrill Matthews, but let's perhaps not go with that. But his speech was quite well received, and it seemed that a lot of people think that he brought his business acumen to the World Economic Forum and basically was the salesman in chief. Is that what you got from it?
Absolutely. He stayed on message, which is always a challenge for him, and so that's good. But in addition, he highlighted the U.S. economy and the great strides the economy has been making over the last year. And Donald Trump always likes to be able to go out and boast about things that are happening under him, and the good economic news from the U.S. plus the tax reform allowed him to do that.
Yeah, Qinduo Xu, I want to ask you, because in his speech he didn't name China by name, but he did talk about fair trade and a level playing field. Qinduo Xu in Beijing, was that the opening salvo in what we can see as more tension with China when it comes to trade in 2018?
I think so. I think, his criticism of so-called like unfair trade and, government subsidies, all those criticism in a sense are targeted, prepared for China, even without naming the names over there. So that statement probably will here is to confirm that, previous statement by U.S. senior officials and also the worries for the, many people that there is probably going to be a trade war, either case by case or by package, or even a full-blown economic war between China and the United States. In return, the Chinese side probably is thinking or is preparing for the consequence of whether to retaliate or not.
Siraj, what do you take from the speech? Was it protectionist? Was it open markets? Or was it essentially America first?
It was essentially about, as you said, Trump being a salesman for America. He was saying the business of America is business, and he's showing that he is a businessman and he will keep America open for business. Yes, he got that jab in with regard to trade. That's the one part where he was, where the message was a little strong, although it could have been a lot worse in terms of his message, which he put out at Da Nang during the APEC summit. But overall, it was measured, but a bit bland, and that is very un-Trumpian, I would say.
A little bit bland, but we'll take a little bit bland after the year we've had, right? I don't know. Li Shen, in terms of the protectionist language, which wasn't very strong, but obviously before his trip to Davos, we saw the imposition of tariffs on global solar panels to the US and washing machines, which affects obviously China because of market share and South Korea pretty heavily. I presume a lot of people were talking about that, especially in your circles, Li Shen, and Davos, and also what might be coming down the pipe in terms of protectionist measures.
Everybody talk about protectionism because Davos is definitely the stage for globalization. So people hate protectionism here, and that's the common target, and that's why people are prepared for a more protectionist tone that Trump was set here. So I agree that his message was actually conceived to be more measured than people anticipated. And of course, from a Chinese perspective, he's still very, very firm on China. He mentioned about reciprocity. He mentioned about the fair trade and the government subsidies and all this. And it's still adding a lot of heat to the U.S.-China trade. And if you sit through the whole week, you can hear from a lot of Chinese participants that they worry about trade war. Jack Ma says he's scared of it. And for any trade war, it probably would take 30 years. It's easy to launch a trade war, but it takes probably 30 years to mend it. So we don't want trade war. People don't want trade war. The Davos crowd doesn't want trade war here. So Trump's message was measured, but still the concern of trade war, it's still pretty obvious here.
Yeah, let's try and work out where the Trump administration are going, because on the one hand you have this America is open for business, and then you have these sort of protectionist measures, and then you have America first. Let's actually listen to US President Trump sort of being the businessman in chief, and then Merrill, I'm going to get your reaction off the bat.
America is the place to do business. So come to America where you can innovate, create, and build. I believe in America. As President of the United States, I will always put America first, just like the leaders of other countries should put their country first also. But America first does not mean America alone.
There's a lot to unpack in that short sentence, especially at the end, Merrill Matthews. America first, but then every country should put themselves first. But America first doesn't mean America alone. Where's he going with this, Merrill? Because this sounds a little bit like a word salad in terms of economic policy.
And you see, Donald Trump has brought this up, and I think it's obvious. Every leader of a country puts their country first. If you didn't, you wouldn't be a leader of your country very long, which is the point he's trying to make. And so what he wants to try to say is he's going to look out for America's interest, but he's going to do it with other countries. And this is standard sort of stuff. I have a family. I put my family first, but I also have other families living on our block, and we work together on various things. It doesn't mean you don't work with others. It just means there's a natural progression there of you putting your own interests first.
But doesn't, for example, he made noises about rejoining the Trans-Pacific Partnership on the very week that the 11 countries that stayed in the negotiations have actually agreed to move forward and will be signing this, it looks like, in March. But at the same time, he's imposing tariffs on washing machines and solar panels unilaterally. I just want to see if you can explain this, because a lot of people are scratching their heads in terms of what is the White House policy.
It's a good question, because he says he wants free trade, but it's got to be fair. He has never defined fair. So none of us actually know what fair means. My organization was supportive of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We actually attended some of the meetings where they were trying to work through their issues. He wants to go to bilateral, and it makes a certain amount of sense. If you're the biggest economy in the world and everybody wants access to your markets and your consumers, you can probably negotiate better agreements if it's just one-on-one, and that seems to be where he wants to go.
Yeah, the wheel and spoke sort of system that served the U.S. well during the Cold War. I get it, but let's hear from China, because, everyone remembers President Xi Jinping's speech from Davos last year, because it was a non-protectionist speech and sort of was widely cited. Qinduo Xu, let's listen to the representative at Davos for China this year, and then I want to get your reaction off the back.
After decades of development, a large-scale middle-income population has emerged in China, giving rise to a vast domestic market. We believe that this open domestic market with a fast-growing middle-income population of 400 million will contribute significantly to global development. The Belt and Road Initiative originated from China, but it is an idea that will deliver opportunity and benefits to the whole world.
Again, Qinduo, a lot to unpack there, but the last bit about the Belt and Road, you know, it seems as US President Donald Trump was talking about America first, but you've got to put your country first. Let's do bilateral deals. We have a much more a multilateral approach coming from Beijing, or at least in words. Are they that far apart?
I think, you know, if you look at, you know, just as my colleague has talked about, you know, there's no clear definition of, you know, what is a fair trade. And also he talked about American, you know, does not mean American alone, America first. You know, there's no problem with America first or China first or, you know, any country to put their interests first. The thing is like there is a slight difference between speaking out about your national priority, your national interests, and unspoken your national interests, because everybody understands that. The thing is like, you know, if you look at the past week, there's a lot of talk of U.S. not giving up its global leadership. And if you look at the speech given by President Trump, there's not much talk about global leadership. You know, there's a lot of talk of the U.S. interests. There's nothing wrong with that. But then, if you want to presume, if you want to go ahead and lead the world, you probably, you know, expected to provide a vision for the future, a vision to deal with the challenges that's facing the whole world. But that's the lacking part. Yeah. If you look at China, I think China, you know, not only Chinese interests, but also they talked about in the Belt and Road and this, you know, common community of a shared future. Yes, it's not only in China, but also the world, the global community.
Yes, that sort of win-win attitude that Beijing loves, likes to emphasize. Sourabh, though, I think Qinduo has a point here, right? That he said America is open to business. Not America's coming to the world, but you come to us. We've lowered our corporate tax rates with this. Come to us, invest in this. Is this where it is? It's America first, come and do business in America, or the US rather.
Yes, that I totally agree with Qinduo, and exactly it's that contrast which you're talking about. When Xi Jinping spoke last year, he talked in terms of not what the international system can do to me or do for me, for China as such. It's what China can do for the international system. And in this instance...
Sort of John F. Kennedy style thing, right?
John F. Kennedy style thing. In this instance, it's President Trump not saying it in those terms. He's talking purely from an American perspective, and that was the difference. It's almost as if President Xi Jinping is the #1 economy and China is the #1 economy and US is the #2 economy, when it's actually the reverse. So I would think Trump should have talked more broadly in what US can do for the international system. And I think that's one area where I think his speech did fail.
Yeah, Li-Shen, this was kind of missing, this plan or some sort of vision that Sourabh is going. Where do we go from here? Because a lot of it isn't fleshed out. Although we're getting warning signs here in Washington, you know, I cover the White House part-time, and there are a lot of noises coming out of the White House that, you know, the solar panels and the washing machines are the beginning, not the end. We're waiting on aluminum decisions. We're waiting on steel decisions. We're expecting movement on intellectual property, technology transfer, all this happening this year, which of course, you know, sets up this potential trade war that you were talking about. How does the world, China, everyone manage that as it comes down the pipe? Is it is it everyone first and so therefore everyone for themselves this year?
I think you are in DC. You know better than I do how strong this the threats are. I think in China, people worry a lot about this. I talk with many of my friends, and they worry a lot about a trade war and where all these signals are heading to. Overall, I think the message Liu He, the chief architect of Xi Jinping's economic policy, sent out here in Davos is pretty clear that China wants to open its market, but it wants to open the market at its own schedule. But it's definitely going to open the market and continue open it because it's for China's self-interest. And if you look at the 40 years of China's reform and opening up, and definitely introducing more competition in the domestic market is very healthy. It's very helpful to build up Chinese economy, to build up the competitiveness of Chinese business and all this. But that takes time, and China wants to set it at its own schedule. Whether that schedule collaborate with American schedule, we don't know. Trump is a businessman. He has a checklist, and he's delivering everything along his checklist. And part of that is trade reciprocity with China. So I hope there will be more conversations, because it's really in nobody's interest to have a trade war. And I hope that China's market opening can speed up as promised by the government. And I hope the U.S. will have some patience to see the result.
Interesting. You know, Merrill Matthews, some people, even who don't like Donald Trump, think he might be the guy to put pressure on the international system. No more business as usual, and his sort of bully pulpit and his sharp language could pressure other countries to move where they haven't. Or is that just wishful thinking?
I don't think it's wishful thinking. I think he's got two things going for him. Number one, we have the largest economy, so people want. Every country wants access to our markets. But number two, the tax reform bill has lowered our corporate income tax rate from 35% down to 21%. I think the other underlying concern around Davos was the fact that now the U.S. is competitive from a tax rate again, and I think that's got to have a lot of companies and countries concerned that companies may be moving back to the U.S. simply because we're competitive on the tax bracket again.
I'm glad you raised that, because competitive, but also competitive in terms of devaluations. You know, if you lower your tax base, you encourage others to do the same. Qinduo Xu, you know the debate in China at the moment about how to respond to these deep tax cuts corporately in the US. It's going to have an effect globally, especially on big trading partners. We had Steve Mnuchin, the US Treasury Secretary, talking the dollar down at Davos, which of course makes exports from the US cheaper around the world. Could we get into this sort of great power competitive race to the bottom if we're not careful?
Well, yes, there's obviously there's a danger, and there's the concern, I think a global concern. That's why before the U.S. tax cut package, there was criticism, from China and also from the European Union. That is the worry. Every country somehow is racing for the bottom for tax cuts. And so far, it's fine. Obviously, China is also under pressure to do something with its own tax system to increase the competitiveness of its economy, of its Chinese firms. But at the same time, I agree with my colleague. China is going to. There's no doubt that China is going to continue with reform and opening up, because it serves the interests of the Chinese economy, but also the interests of the whole world. But it will do so on its own pace, because it has a lot of challenges, like the financial risks. The Chinese government want to make sure there's a stable financial system, because the whole system basically is being established. It's not an established economy, not an established system, let's say. So it takes time. At the same time, I think China has also its strength. As predicted, 2018, we will see China will become the largest or equal, probably, the market in terms of consumption, in terms of retail with the United States. So China will become also very competitive in that sense. Will basically welcome export from other countries to the Chinese market.
Sourabh, obviously we talked about Trump, we've talked about China, but there was a whole load of other actors at Davos. Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, we had Angela Merkel. What do you think the sort of common theme, because Davos, because it happens so early in the year, can sort of set the agenda, at least for the global financial elite, not the rest of us. What do you think sort of came out of there in terms of other speeches?
I think the common theme, which is the theme that President Xi alluded to last year, is that we have common challenges, areas like climate change, disruptive technologies, and terrorism, and other interstate, other transnational issues. Common challenges which cannot be dealt by any one country. We need global cooperation to tackle these challenges. That was one of the key themes which came out. The other key theme which I think that came out from many of these speakers was cannot shut our windows and doors. We need to remain open, and through remaining open is the way we can both collaborate and meet our challenges together. So I think that's a theme which cut across both developing countries and developed countries. And frankly, with President Trump speaking, not making a harsh speech out there, I hope this sense will pervade the spirit of how we move forward this year. Because yes, as you say, we do have real trade tensions, not just on the trade front, but on the investment front also coming up in the next couple of months.
Li-Shen, you were there on the ground, you're still there. What were the buzzwords, what were the trends, what have you been telling your readers to sort of watch out for when it comes to 2018 coming out of Davos?
I think it's very optimistic, surprisingly.
Really?
It's so optimistic that a lot of the people we talk to are thinking it's probably too optimistic. Because compared to last year, people were very sanguine. People were very pessimistic about where the world economy is going to head to. But this year, when they convene in Davos again, the first year of the month, and the world economy is doing fairly well most of the part, and U.S. economy continued to expand and very quickly, and the Chinese economy is doing very well. Europe and Japan, all these are doing fairly well. So people don't foresee any major policy obstacles in the landscape. So what they start to worry is the sense of complacency. If the stock market is so strong, and if the central banks start to rein in the interest, to hike up the interest rate too quickly, because the debt is still very high, and so what kind of shock that will send to the financial market. So, but people don't foresee a major crisis. They think it's going to be a fairly good year. It doesn't mean that there won't be turbulence. The financial market or the finance probably will continue to have turbulence, but overall, I think the sense, the pulse in Davos this year is pretty optimistic.
Merrill Matthews, it's good news, although I don't know whether we should be happy when Wall Street thinks everything's going all right. Usually things end up terrible six months later.
Usually means a flip.
Exactly. And there are always black swans out there, as you know. Is President Trump getting used to this? We just played some video of him sort of waving at everyone and getting a warm reception. You know, he hasn't worked well necessarily in big international crowds. It's not really his constituency, if you like. Do you think he's sort of warming to this and sticking to script a bit more and understanding what's required of the president?
Well, whether or not he's sticking to the script a bit more depends upon the day.
Right.
He changes with that. But he did stay on script there. And the good news is here, the president is surrounded by a number of people, not all, but a number of people who are free traders. And they're going to put pressure for him to keep the markets open, because not only do other countries want access to U.S. consumers and markets, but U.S. businesses want access to Chinese products because they use them in so many things that they produce. So if we're going to grow as an economy, we need access to those products.
Well, that's very well put, because, you know, America first, China first, Germany first, Europe first. Everyone in this globalized economy actually does need each other, but it's working out priorities nationally as well. That's all we've got time for. I'm sorry we have to end it there, but thanks so much from Dallas, from Davos, from Beijing, and here in the studio. What great datelines for this show. That's it for this edition of The Heat. Thanks so much for joining us. See you soon.